Hello, welcome. Welcome to the Operation Risk and Security webinar of 2020. It gives me immense pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the European Lotteries and the World Lottery Association. I am Leos Klovac and I will be your moderator for today. I am located in the Central Europe, in the beautiful city of Prague, working as a security manager for a lottery company Saska. I am grateful to be part of this lottery family, sharing the security knowledge for 5 years now. Topic of the last seminar was resiliency, and this year, actually, our resiliency has been tested in every possible way, hasn't it? This time, we will be exploring player identification together with continuity and crisis management. These are really hot topics to discuss, but there is even much more to come in the following 4 days of the seminar. Also, I want to express my appreciation to each of you for doing the hard job that risk and security management really is. I know what you are facing every day. It's increasing complexity, uncertainty, and interconnection brought by an unprecedented reliance on technology. You also need to stay mindful of the heavy hand of the regulation. And you are probably fighting this fight with lack of resources and many extra hours. So big thank you again for doing your job, and I really hope that you will feel during this seminar that you are not alone in this challenging position, and you will find the experience shared by the speakers valuable for you. Now, let me welcome here two amazing persons, the representatives of the European Lotteries Association and World Lottery Association who support our community and enable this seminar to happen. First, greetings from Arjan van het Vieren. Arjan is a recognized expert. He has a doctoral degree on gambling regulation. He has been strongly involved in several EL working groups for many years and joined the executive committee in 2013. Secretary General of the European Lotteries Association, Arjan van het Vieren.
Thank you very much, Leos. Were very kind words, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm at home, smart working, as many of you are probably also doing, and it's an honor to open on behalf of EL this webinar. And I wrote down some words, and I just want to share them with you all. And it was early March 2020 when I was approached on behalf of the EL Executive Committee to ask the EL Operational Risk and Assurance Working Group to give an overview of the best practices in business continuity, as the EL members were probably facing an impactful situation due to the spread of COVID-19. An excellent overview was then produced, of course, by the working group, and it was shared with the EL members, and I think that many EL members learned from it as well. Nobody could have foreseen that we would enter this unprecedented times. I don't have to tell anybody here present today in this webinar the importance of mitigating operational risks and other security incidents. You have all done your utmost best to mitigate them, and even the ones that you didn't foresee, you had to find an answer to in your risk policies. Never before was the EL WLA seminar or webinar, of course I have to say, so actual as this edition. I thank the members of the EL Aura working group, especially Carlos and Eva, and of course our friends from WLA for their commitment to organize this webinar. It promises to be meaningful, full of learnings and best practices that we need in these unprecedented times. The best value, therefore, you can get at this moment in these impactful moments. I wish you all a very fine webinar. Stay safe and of course stay healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arjan. Thank you again for your support. And now Luca Esposito would like to welcome you as well. Luca hails from Italy, worked for 10 years for IGT, where he gained deep insight into day-to-day operations and understanding of the needs and concerns of lotteries. Executive Director of the World Lottery Association, Luca Esposito.
Thank you, Leos. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. It's important to say that because we have people attending this event from Australia to Brazil, from Uruguay to Vietnam, just to mention few. So it's an amazing opportunity for our members to attend this great event. And on behalf of the World WLA, the executive committee, I would like to thank you, the organizing team, ADL and the WLA, who made this seminar possible. I mean, I think that they put an admirable program which tackles some of the key issues we are facing in today's connected world. So Leos will go through the program definitely, but I would like just to highlight that the greatness of this program. We will go through player identification, crisis management, like Karin said before. This is of actuality now more than ever, and now we will have the opportunity to hear from two executive people from Microsoft. Then this year our WLA security program turns 20, so it's 20 years old, and that's not better opportunity to launch the new version of the security framework. And finally, also like mentioned by Leos and Arjen, will talk about risk management. The aim is that raising the awareness of risk management among all of you. I know the Leos will go and present the details of the program, but I think it was needed to put the accent on this unbearable program, which has been put together by the two organizing team. Having said that, I would like to thank again everyone for the organization, and I wish you all a great event, not only today, but also in the next days to come. So stay well, stay safe, and enjoy today's sessions. Thanks.
Thank you, Luca. Big thank you for your support and enabling this seminar to happen.
Thank you.
Now, for the first time ever, this regular event is online. Of course, this is due to the extraordinary circumstances brought about by the COVID-19 outbreak. But we will take full advantage of the online platform. Of course, you need to stay in listen-only mode, but you can ask any questions you may have via the GoToWebinar chat throughout the event. We will do our best to address all of the questions received after each presentation or at the end of today's session. Also, presentation slides and recordings of the webinar will be made available to EL and WLA members afterwards. Now, this time the webinar is divided in 4 days, Monday to Thursday, every day with a session lasting for 1 or 2 hours. It will be 4 amazing sessions, each having own focus. Day 1 opens the webinar with the topic of player identification, which will be addressed by the keynote, presentation, and a roundtable, all together in 2 hours. Final day 4 will follow the same structure and will be focused on the continuity and crisis management, moderated by our famous Carlos Bachmeier. In the between, on the day 2, we are going to focus on crisis management with cybersecurity experts from Microsoft. And attention, you should not miss the special event on the day 3, where a new version of WLA Security Control Standard of 2020 will be presented. This is surely a must-see session for all of us in the industry. And believe it or not, but these platforms make it possible to catch up with your colleagues as well. The networking session will be held at the end of the day 4, just before closing the webinar week. And now, let me welcome you again in the first session focused on the player identification. We have 3 items on the program today. In a minute, we will start with keynote about importance of player identification in current digital world. Then there will be presentation of Riskart on personal data breach, and we will finish with roundtable with 4 amazing participants discussing player identification from different angles. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce the keynote speaker. Egil Skorve from Norway has been a central contributor in the digitalization of Norsk Tipping for more than 20 years. Norsk Tipping now has a digital share of almost 80%, with a portfolio comprising all game categories, and Egil significantly contributed, especially to developing mobile channel. Egil is now head of gaming at Bypass, which is the provider of identification and payment solution to Norsk Tipping. As you probably know, 100% of players are registered in Norway. Thus, simple and secure player identification is the key process on that market. What are the key concepts of modern identification solution will share with us in his keynote, Egil Skorbe.
Okay, thank you, Leos. I would like to thank the organizers of the WLA and Security Webinar Week for inviting Bypass to hold a keynote speech. It's truly a great opportunity to talk about how a highly successful lottery has managed to use ID as an important tool to convert their business into customer-centric and data-driven operation. With this as a background, I will give a brief introductory comment on how Norsk Tipping dealt with COVID-19, since it in some respects relates to the ID solution. During the lockdown of society, video lottery terminals in Norway were closed and general access to kiosks were restricted. Moreover, sports games were in practice dead due to suspension of events, although the Belarusian Football League got some new fans, admittedly. Nevertheless, this did not affect Norsk Tipping significantly. Of course, big jackpots drew many customers to the number game, but from the perspective of the webinar, multi-channel authentication, that is authentication that can both be used across physical and digital sales channels, helped thousands of customers move to mobile and PCs with low user threshold. A significant increase in new customers also took place. Enrollment, the process of converting users into customers, often has an unsatisfactory completion rate. This is often due to the verification of identity, which can be, for various reasons, quite cumbersome. So the topic for today's keynote is player identification, why we need it, and how it can be made simpler and more secure. And finally, why lotteries indeed differ from e-commerce. First, a few questions, a few hopes or notes about Bypass. Bypass has been in the ID and payment business for 20 years as a contractor of Norsk Tipping's ID solution. In addition, we do consulting, business development, and innovation for European lotteries, which have a strategic fit with Norsk Tipping. In addition, Bypass has developed ID solution for the private and public sector in Norway. Digitalization has long been hailed as a paradigm shift affecting, penetrating, and obliterating all parts of the society. We are talking about the consumer economy and data as a new gold. For those of you who have seen the document drama Social Dilemma about the utilization of data by big tech, you know how manipulation and addictiveness can be exploited to the extremes. For lotteries with social responsibility and governmental regulation, data needs to be used with greater restraint and care. However, even for lotteries, digitalization changes the landscape drastically. Digital technology removes traditional borders as a competitive advantage and enables the scaling of operation on an unprecedented scale. The absence of borders and low cost of entry for new players results in a myriad of new competitors and substitutes. The modern consumer expects fast product changes, lot of news, abundance of offerings, and personalized experience. So, to stay alive in the digital competitive market, the operation must be centered around the customers to stay relevant, reduce churn, and secure revenue. The rhetorics of digitalization is often dominated by e-commerce and big tech. For lotteries, however, KYC, know your customer, is much more than marketing and using data to sell ads. To sell ads, it's actually not so important who you are, but what you are. And to quote the movie Social Dilemma again, if you don't buy the product, you are the product. Herein lies a big difference. A lottery conducts a sustainable business where profit is balanced with responsibility and accountability. or true identity of the customers is required to be sustainable. Data should also be used to prevent compulsive gaming habits, prevent criminal acts such as money laundering and collusion and rigging of games, and general compliance with government regulations. This requires a balanced approach where KYC means to obtain reliable answer and insight to all questions along the 4 dimensions, such as what's the net worth of your customers? What do players do with the winnings? Sports players do with the winnings? Do multi-channel customers play more? How do responsibility schemes affect revenue? What are the identities of customers with sign of serious compulsive gaming problems? Is the same payment card used by different players? And the last example, do cash deposits follow specific patterns suggesting money laundering? So how do lotteries compare to other groups of businesses? For many purposes, a lottery lies between e-commerce and banks on a scale representing the ID requirement. Purchasing of lottery tickets should be simple. This is also true for most other lottery use cases, except perhaps when big prizes are paid out. Then you really want to know the correct person to receive the prize. But different ID requirements also apply to banks and e-commerce. Let's take a look at the bank, for example. Okay, paying a bill or transferring money to another person requires a strong ID, but transferring funds between a customer's own accounts does not necessarily, or it will be satisfactory with a simple ID because the customer won't lose any money. If we move on to e-commerce, selling goods requires a simple ID since the customer has an interest in receiving the ordered items which have been fully paid for. On the other hand, a strong ID will be required if the purchase is financed to be paid in installments, because this is in fact a loan. The shop will want a judicially binding agreement to secure their assets if the buyer defaults on the loan. The realization that use cases have different requirements to the strength of identification lead to the notion of ID levels. IDOS, the EU regulation, formalizes this notion to simplify cross-border digital interaction within the European Union. If we view lotteries as a special case, what can we then learn from IDOS and what does it imply? It means that also lotteries need to have different ID levels for the use cases to be attractive and easy for customers. That means we believe that the lotteries will need a low level ID to place bets where you can register the play with a mobile ID and a loyalty card without PIN and social security number if that's applicable. And then we have the more complex use cases where it will be more in line with requirements to have two-factor solutions. Two-factor solutions also can be divided into different ID levels because of the nature of the authenticator. More about that later. And finally, we also would like to have what you can call high-level identity, where we really do the ID proofing. Customer onboarding is one of the key processing of a customer-oriented lottery. Onboarding is about taking a claimed identity, verifying it at an appropriate level, and building a customer profile. The quality of the onboarding process is crucial for lotteries, which rely on KYC to execute their customer operation and comply with laws and regulation. However, for many customers, onboarding is a cumbersome process with complicated user input and use of security tokens. It can be time-consuming, and the result is often a low conversion rate. Onboarding is further complicated by the fact that the motivation and drivers to become a customer vary significantly. After all, lottery products are convenience products, and very often not in the top of people's minds. Many people are triggered by marketing messages and high jackpots, and interest fades quickly. User context add to the complexity. And also, finally, onboarding must work smoothly in both physical and digital sales channels. So if you take a look at some key processes, indication. To start onboarding, a user needs to give an indication of their identity. This can be done explicitly by entering fields in a form or implicitly by retrieving relevant data from an external source. At this step, it might be an idea to check if onboarding should be terminating due to suspension or blacklisting, or maybe the user is already a customer. The low-level ID, which results from the indication process, can be used for marketing purposes and can be strengthened at a later stage. It can also be used to collect data. The next process is a tricky one and the main topic of this keynote, and that's identification, which is a process to verify a customer identity. This is also called an ID proofing process. And the verification of the user is done by checking with a digital or physical ID, depending on the sales channels. And the goal of the process is a verified identity at the highest possible level. The third process, compilation. To get a holistic view of the customer, requires in practice that additional information is retrieved to get a richer view of the customer. This can be done by encouraging the user to input more data or by accessing databases and registers. In Norway, name, address, geocoordinates, pet, sometimes even bank account number can be retrieved automatically based on the social security number. Other types of information, such as email addresses or grassroots receiver, must be entered by the user. The last process is about keeping the profile updated. The process is typically of combinations and changes done by the user or by automatic updates from registers. To sum up, the ID level secured during the enrollment is crucial for later activity. Even when the customer is authenticated at a lower level, for instance, during placing bet, it will point back to the correct individual. So how can we then identify a user with a high-level ID? Of course, these options vary from country to country. Nevertheless, there are some basic options which should be widely available. Manual verification of physical IDs is the traditional way for player identification. Manual verification has been digitalized to the extent that the process may take place via video. Another way of digitalizing the verification step is to collect data and send it to a third party, which then verifies the provided data and checks with internal and external registers. This can sometimes be an asynchronous process. More recent innovation are digital scanning and reading of ID documents via NFC using a mobile. Such technologies can be integrated in solutions for digital and physical sales channels. Liveness check and matching can be done manually or by using AI techniques. In the latter case, selfie videos are used to match the ID document with the individual. This is a scalable solution which will work fine in real time. The last two options that we will mention in this presentation is the use of digital ID. Typically, this way of ID proofing is similar to logging in on the bank. An identifier for the customer is returned and used by the lotteries. A more fancy but still very attractive solution is to use another service provider's ID instrument for identification. This is often referred to as proxied federation. One example could be to map a retailer's loyalty ID to lottery IDs and then use it to placing bet in external sales channels. We will see a video for that later. We need to conceptualize identification and identifiers a bit more to get a broader understanding. To introduce important concepts, I will give you a brief history lesson, which takes us about 6 years back in time. In Norway, as in most countries, I reckon, IDs and registers were of poor quality, fragmented, unstructured, and spread across a vast number of bodies. Typically, data was stored in church books, communal registers, censuses, and various voluntary registers. This was not for sure bearable. When the first computers were arriving, some clever people began thinking how technology could use to improve the situation. The first driver was to make public administration more efficient. So in 1964, all Norwegians were assigned a national identity number, which were managed by an electronic register. 21 years later, to make public administration even more efficient, Norway Tax wanted all financial institutions to do electronic financial reporting of their assets. And actually, to make this work, the financial institutions were allowed to use the national identity number as a customer identity, which simplified their business significantly. In 1990, we saw that the national population registers were becoming a part of the early phase of digitalization. The register received a very rudimentary API, which could be used mostly by governmental bodies. In year 2000, Norsk Tipping started using NIN as their player identity. And for the first time, they got a truly unique identity of their player database. Another interesting thing was that in 2003, all banks in Norway joined forces for a common ID solution. They decided that we are not going to compete on ID solution, but rather on banking. The bank ID is based on the national identity number, and it has become very popular. Today, more than 80% have bank ID, most likely because you need to use it to log in on banks, but also because no transaction fees are exposed to end users. The takeout from this, maybe this one should, okay, sorry. The takeout from the history lesson is the introduction of persistent national identifier, which was easy to adopt in digital interaction and business. Also, the transition of the ID and the national population register from originally being intended solely for government purposes to become the identifier in many private enterprises, which were subject to reporting obligations. And finally, the creation of an ecosystem on top of the national population register with competing companies providing high-level identification. The illustration aims to put this context into bigger context. The quality of an ID is viewed as a combination of strength of related authenticators and their identification level. Currently, the business model of big tech neither relies on strength on authenticators or high identity level. However, they are successfully created an ecosystem for their profiles in order to collect as much data as possible. On the other end of the diagram, you will find the Nordic countries, Estonia, and possibly a few other countries with a strong, persistent, strong national ID provided in an ecosystem. The lack of a persistent national identifier will require that serial numbers from passports, driver licenses, or national ID cards must be used. The challenge is that these identifiers differ and also sometimes change when a new ID document is issued. When national registers are not in place, there is a big chance that duplicates will exist. Additionally, tax numbers and health numbers are often only assigned to a subset of the citizens and not available online. This poses a great challenge for lotteries. Probably the solution in these cases will be to base identification of customers using a diverse set of bank authenticators. So, what does this mean for lotteries? Lotteries deals with big money. Jackpots exceed 150 million euros, and verified identities are required for responsibility and to combat fraud. Complex sales, comprising numerous physical and digital sales channels, also complicate the picture. And we need to keep the attention of the customers. Lottery tickets are a convenience product, and purchases are often driven by impulse. And impulse quite often contradicts with authenticators that are difficult to use. So what should an ideal solution for lotteries then look like? To cope with the complexities surrounding lottery sales, an ideal solution needs to provide both high-level identification and easy-to-use authenticators optimized for gaming. It is about reducing user barriers and at the same time providing trust. External authenticators deal with generic identifiers, whereas internal authenticators are limited to lottery services. The aim of the internal authenticators is to offer the best possible user experience combined with cost efficiency. So external authenticators are suitable for high-level identity, which we can use in onboarding process and for very specific use cases. And sometimes they are also very useful to support impulse actions. Internal authenticators, on the other hand, are specifically designed to particular sales channels or user context, and they are cost efficient to use. And the lotteries can be in charge of the customer journeys, designing the customer journeys, and configure the user experience. So this figure shows an ideal solution for the lotteries. I will even say that it's a next generation ideal solution for lotteries. And what you see is based on the player profile. It's implemented on a service-oriented architecture. All functionality is delivered through documented API, putting the gaming operator in full control of the development of the customer journeys. The APIs utilize open standards such as REST, SCIM, and OpenID Connect for easy integration. Using standards has many advantages. Lottery will avoid being locked in by proprietary solutions. Moreover, standards help reduce cost, anticipate technical requirements, simplify integration, and stimulate innovative efficiency. Service orientation also gives flexibility in selecting operational environment. The right side shows how relevant IDPs can be integrated via the identity broker and provided to the lottery through uniform APIs. This means that ID proofing as part of customer enrollment, high-level authentication, and high-level authentication for specific function can be managed transparently for the customer, for the lottery. The identity broker also integrates with low-level IDPs to be able to integrate with lottery customer journeys with social media. The world behind the identity broker will be defined by the status and availability of a high-level identification mechanism and therefore differ from country to country. The part of the ID solution consisting of sub-services for enrollment, authentication, and authorization, including all the internal authenticators, are widely applicable and country agnostic. The internal authenticators ID level vary since their characteristics and contexts are different. Additionally, the ID solution integrates with relevant registers. In Norway, that will be the National Population Register and the Cadastre. The ID solution is neutral to the master data management. Some lotteries will prefer to manage customer data themselves. For others, it may be attractive to be relieved of the tedious compliance aspects of ID solutions and therefore outsource it. In any case, the lifecycle services will be the responsibility and of the party possessing the master data. Okay, now we are going to see a video. It's video number 1. And just to give a very brief introduction, Vipps is a mobile payment and identification app targeted for the Norwegian mass market. And the video shows how easy it is to onboard by using VIPs for ID proofing and almost all the source of the data needed by Norsk Tipping. Okay, Jan, video number 1, please.
Det skal alltid være enkelt og sikkert å bli kunde hos Norsk Tipping. Bypass vil derfor kontinuerlig integrere med leverandører av digitale ID-løsninger som VIPs og BankID. Flere enn 3,2 millioner nordmenn har VIPs installert på mobilen. Disse kundene har allerede benyttet BankID for å identifisere seg. Dette kan utnyttes til å gjøre det raskt og enkelt å bli kunde hos Norsk Tipping. Last ned Norsk Tippings app, eller gå til www.norsktipping.no. Klikk deretter på Kom i gang. Tast inn ditt mobilnummer. Når du har klikket på Neste, vil VIPs-appen starte. Bekreft din identitet med ansiktsgjenkjenning eller PIN i VIPs-appen. Klikk Fortsett som for å godta overføring av fødselsnummer og kontonummer til Norsk Tipping. Tilbake i Norsk Tipping-appen må du godta Norsk Tippings betingelser og svar eventuelt på spørsmålene for politisk eksponerte personer. Spillerprofilen blir fylt ut med automatisk oppslag i folkeregistret og matrikkelen. Bypass gir kunden en unik ID som sikrer Norsk Tipping ett kundebilde. Det opprettes også en spillerkonto som enkelt kan brukes for alle spill i samtlige kanaler. Brukeren er nå kunde hos Norsk Tipping og klar til å spille. Tilsvarende superenkel kunderegistrering kan også gjøres med BankID, BankID på mobil eller Bypass-ID på mobil. Og snart kan man også identifisere seg i digitale kanaler med fysisk legitimasjon, som enten skannes eller leses med NFC.
Okay. We have yet another video, and this video shows an example of an internal authenticator, which is used by more than 1 million users in Norway, and it can really be used in a lot of different channels. So, Jan, please show video number 2.
Bypass tilbyr en lang rekke autentikatorer som er spesielt utviklet for bestemte salgskanaler, teknologi eller bruksområder. For mobilen har Bypass utviklet og patentert en ID-komponent som kan integreres i både iPhone og Android-apper. Spillerne kan enten benytte PIN-kode eller biometri. Med ID-komponenten kan Norsk Tipping selv utvikle grensesnittet for å sikre en konsistent brukeropplevelse. I Norsk Tippings mobilapp åpne appen og godta biometri. Klikk på logg inn. Bruk ansiktsgjenkjenning eller tast inn PIN-kode. Kunden er logget inn og klar til å spille. Bypass ID-komponent kan også benyttes i andre typer salgskanaler. Eksempel på dette er mobile webapplikasjoner, nettlesere på PC-er, men også spilleautomater. ID-komponenten bidrar dermed til å knytte mobilen med både fysiske og andre digitale salgskanaler.
Okay, the mobile component is really a very good compromise between user-friendliness and security. It's a quite advanced authenticator, but still very popular, both by Norsk Tipping and their customers. So the last video that I will show is how lottery tickets can be purchased in self-service terminal. And just to explain a little bit before we show the video, Coop, which is one of the biggest retailers in Norway, has loyalty app, which includes both ID and payment. And users have been identified with bank ID on beforehand. So what happens in the background is that IDs are exchanged automatically with Norsk Tipping's IDs. Okay, Jan, please, video number 3.
I handelen flyttes lojalitetsprogrammene over til mobilen med egne løsninger for identifisering og betaling. Selvbetjente kassapunkter erstatter betjente kasser. Når Bypass kobler sammen handelens og Norsk Tippings ID-er, oppstår nye muligheter for å levere spill i butikkjedenes handelskonsepter. Kundene kan da enkelt spille registrert med Coop Pay i selvbetjente kassapunkter. Åpne Coop-appen. Klikk på medlemskort. Identifiser ved å skanne QR-koden. Lotto vises på skjermen. Skann varene. Velg Lotto og legg til i varelisten. Betal for alle varer og spill med Coop Pay. Norsk Tipping sender SMS med kvittering for Lotto. Tilsvarende enkle kundereiser kan også realiseres i andre eksterne salgskanaler med Bypass som integrator av ID-er.
I like this concept. Okay, ID and payment for that matter is a very important part of lotteries interaction with the customers. So we also believe that IDs and ID solution will be important for innovation. Social gaming is one such thing, such as playing together in betting groups or showing affection by gifting lottery products. So to do that in a sustainable way, we might want to extend the ID concept also to include groups, not only persons. As we also saw digital retail, there are a number of new opportunities opening up, which we will like to explore more in the future. So, summing up, I hope this keynote has persuaded you that the lottery business is not standard e-commerce. ID proofing and verification of ID is a key process for lottery to manage, and national identifiers and ID ecosystem vary from country to country and need to be treated specially. From a technological point of view, we see that standards like OpenID Connect and Scheme simplifies the ID solution tremendously. And EU regulation like EIDAS puts focus on digital interaction and security. Likewise, banks are standardizing payments via the PSD2 directive. So our question from Bypass to the lotteries around the world and to the European lotteries and the WLA, should European lotteries, or world lotteries for that matter, work to create a common digital identity policy for their customers? Okay, thank you.
Skorbe, thank you very much for amazing keynote. Really very interesting remarks. It's amazing how developed the online channel and online identification is in Scandinavia. I have one question from the audience for you. A person has one national identification number, but can have more bank account numbers? How do you prevent players having multiple accounts when using only a bank account number as a player identification means?
That's a very good question. Thank you for that. The unique identifier for Norsk Tipping is the national identity number, not the bank account number. You can change the bank account number if you want, but you can only associate one bank account number with your customer profile. In Norway, all bank account numbers are stored in a central database, which can be retrieved together with a social security number. So if a player wants to change their bank account number, he or she needs to provide a new bank account number, and we will check with the register if he or she is the right owner of that bank account number. So only one bank account number at a time.
Okay, I think it's clear. Thank you. I hope it's clear. And all participants, please do not hesitate to raise questions through the platform during the whole session. We will have time at the end of today's session to answer as much questions as possible. For now, Egil, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And now it's time for me to contribute and present a product of the Operation Risk and Assurance Working Group of European Lotteries. So let me share with you the product, a tool which could be very useful and practical for you who are wondering, is the personal data breach risk well managed in my company? What can I do more to protect valuable personal data? Here comes the European Lotteries to help you. Members of Operation Risk and Assurance Working Group of EL have started the program to create a toolbox for members who wish to review their government of major operational risks. Members of the working group are experts in their field and work together to collect the best practice and provide you with the tools and references available for the specific operation risk. Reference card on personal data breaches is one of the first products in this toolbox. It is currently in the form of draft, and it will be hopefully available soon once it is finalized and approved. Player identification comes with an obligation to protect the personal data and avoid data breaches. The need to keep the personal data of our customers confidential has been there from the beginning. Usually, the lottery has been required to keep the customer data confidential by local regulation even before the international regulations such as GDPR. Nowadays, every European lottery is aware of the need to prevent personal data breaches in the context of GDPR. But GDPR actually just added, take this risk seriously. Personal data breaches can result in huge fines. No matter if you have to follow the GDPR regulation or not, the lottery needs to take care of its reputation. And there is a saying that reputation is like a crumpet paper. Once you damage it, you can hardly make it as smooth as before. And personal data breach is usually considered as a significant reputational risk. There are many ways how the personal data can be leaked. It can be lost or stolen device containing unprotected personal data, information system which is vulnerable and exploited by the hacker, insider who commits the internal fraud and misuses personal data for his profit, credential stuffing as a method in which attacker uses lists of compromised users' credentials to breach into the player's account and to get to their personal data, or failure of third party to protect the data as a processor. In this case, unfortunately, the data controller fails as well. Variety of threats clearly illustrates that the protection against the breaches needs to be complex. Now, let's see if the risk reference card can be any useful to you to assist you in governing such a complex risk. Let's look on the card from the practical perspective. It includes the description of the risk elements and concerns regarding personal data breach that we talked about. In the introduction section, it summarizes the main aspects of the risk and challenges in the risk mitigation. Nowadays, each company has some security measures to protect its data. Information security management system and data governance are the basis. Protection of personal data just improve those measures and put additional layers of protection specifically for the personal data in the terms of data loss prevention program and DLP technology. On the other hand, personal data protection includes two specific aspects. First, internal threats are at least as important as external threats. Statistics state that between 50 and 70% of reported cases of personal data breach are caused by an employee due to negligence or intent. And second, incident response plan should include specific steps required by the GDPR and other regulations, and usually includes obligation to inform regulators, authorities, and the affected persons as well. In the next section of the card, there are recommended risk controls grouped into 5 areas: data protection management, data governance, data protection program, and data loss prevention technology with incident response plan. It starts with the commitment of the company for data protection through understanding where personal data is stored and how is it transferred as a part of data governance. It also covers the actions recommended to mitigate the risk of personal data loss, including general data protection actions and specific personal data prevention technology. And finally, there are included specific steps that shouldn't be missing in your incident response plan. Each of the risk control includes clear objective, specific outcome, and also lottery specific aspects that should be considered. For the card is planned to be developed also self-assessment form, which can help you to assess your status in the key risk controls. It has a form of an Excel sheet, and it includes the questions covering all mentioned areas from data governance to incident response plan, and help you to identify your strengths and weaknesses. Maybe you have perfect vulnerability management, but what about your employees? Do they follow the policy for personal data transfers? Your self-assessment results will be calculated and displayed in the form of graph, helping you identify which areas should be improved. You may find that you have covered some areas better than the others. By the way, don't worry. This self-assessment result is for your purposes only. This has nothing to do with any certification or standard whatsoever. You can be 100% honest in your self-assessment, as the results stays only with you. Now, the areas for improvement were identified. Again, it is not binding standard in any way, so you are free to decide what areas identified for improvement you wish to target, if any. In any case, document includes references covering all areas of key risk controls to provide you with more details about it. It consists of big guns, such as ISO standards, and also more practical guides for taking the first steps. Most of the references are available online, and each reference comes along with the short description, what's in there for you, and why you should open it, as you can see in the example. These references were carefully selected by the experts from the field. They did the research for you, picking just the most relevant sources. I believe the final form of the card will be approved and available soon, so do not hesitate to contact the European Lottery and ask for risk reference card on personal data breaches. Thank you. Okay, I can see that we have one more question to Egil. So we will answer this one at the end of the session, probably. And no more questions to my presentation. It's fine. Anyway, please notice that on the day 4, Carlos Bachmeier will present another card from the EL Working Group Toolbox focused on operation continuity and something very handy these days, so do not miss Thursday session and Carlos with the topic of operational continuity. And now we will proceed with the roundtable. Okay, so we have 4 amazing guests at the roundtable ready to discuss the player identification from different angles and share their point of view on the current challenges that lotteries are facing in terms of player identification. Let me present you František Carbol, Compliance Manager from Saska, Czech Republic. František is my dear colleague. I highly respect him for his knowledge and expertise in anti-money laundering and compliance. He will share his story about development of new online identification service in cooperation with major local banks. The next VIP person at the table, Sir Carlos Bachmeier, the man in charge of this seminar. His position is called Risk Continuity and Personal Data Protection Manager at WLA, Spain, but we know him as an executive chair of the EL Operation and Risk Assurance Working Group. Carlos will talk about risk related to player identification. I'm proud to present also Silvia Kerti, AML officer in lottery company Szerencsé, located in Hungary. Silvia is a recognized expert in the anti-money laundering. She will share her story how she managed the compliance with Hungarian AML Act and how she coped with the challenges to simplify the identification process during the curfew. And last but not least, Oscar Vovo, head of consulting business Telefónica Tech Avertis. From Spain, Oscar is engineer, entrepreneur, and businessman, and during his 20 years of professional career, has productized solutions and services used by multinational and public institutions. Oscar will share his experience in customer identification from telco and banking industry. František, my dear friend, please start the roundtable.
Thank you very much for your kind words on my expertise. Thank you to the EL and WLA for having me on this webinar. I will share my screen with the presentation, or at least I will try to. So just give me a few seconds. So now everybody should see. I think everything is okay, so we can get to it as my time is very limited. So in Saska, we are pretty new to the online era because providing lotteries and other lottery and gaming products within the online was only become possible in 2017. Before that, we could only provide online the sports betting in the Czech Republic. After the 2017, everything, including lotteries, instant, numerical, e-scratches, casino games, and sports betting become online. As a part of this journey, in the early beginning of the 2017, we asked ourselves a question within the discussion of the with our local regulator, Ministry of the Finance, how to verify the person, because there were no strong rule book for us to handle it from the regulator, so we need to choose our best approach. In the end of the 2017, we've comprised the process of customer identification or strong identification for different types of the products, because for the lottery in the Czech Republic, you are not obliged person within the AML law, but for the e-casino or the sports betting games, you are. Therefore, the identification for those two gaming verticals have to be in compliance with local AML Act and European AML directive. Therefore, we started to verify our customers on our point of sales within our retail network, which brings the question if the retailers are doing their work correctly. It has to have excessive controls. And for the lottery games, we start to collecting online national ID, the scans of the national IDs, which has to be processed manually. And these processes were considered as not sufficient for the online era for Saska and not exactly for the market. So we start looking for the inspiration, and I was very impressed what the IGIL have said in the keynote. And I have to say that Norwegians and Swedes were one of our inspirational guys, because within Czech local regulation, there is also a clause which allow us to take over the identity from the banking or financial institution, which are from the EU or local market. And therefore, we start to think how we can manage to use this utility from the AML law in our daily-to-daily operations. Since then, we met with many of the banks. We start for looking how to transfer the identity of the customers of the bank to some APIs. And we found out that most of them, due to PSD2, have already APIs ready for some of the information, as is the name of the customer, his address, and other personal details. But the scope of the AML regulation in the Czech Republic, and I believe so in all European Union, requires quite more extensive set of the data from the customer. So we've begun the discussion, and in the March of the 2018, we were able to persuade first two banks to provide us with not standardized API, as in case of the Norwegians. Every bank has its own standard, usually based on OL2 protocol, which could provide us the customer's data. It was very long and quite painful journey, but it's really worth it. Currently, we are working with the 6 main banks on the Czech market, and we were able to maintain high security and integrity identification of the customers even during COVID, because in the Czech Republic, the curfew was very extensive. It hit us really big time on the retail side, which was considered as one of the backbones of the identification process of the customers. And since then, the amount or the share of the online identification is steadily raising in our portfolio. Just for some imagination, 50% of the verifications are now done online, and we are considered as leader in the digital identity market. Currently, we are looking for something which is more similar to the Norwegian or Swedish colleagues. It's a bank consortium which should provide a generic standard for identification providers, and it should be very easy for the customer, and also it should be easier to integrate and not to manage so many integrations. So this is what we do in Saska, and maybe a few points which could be useful for somebody who doesn't have a digital identity providers in their country. If you would like to do something like we do, talk to your banks. Usually, they could be more than ready to support you along the way than you could think of. As I mentioned, the PSD2 and other EU regulations, which are very demanding on the bank sector and on the standardization of the used methods, could be very helpful in this way. And also, in some cases, the banks or the other identity providers doesn't looking on the lotteries as a reliable and viable business partner. But in our case, it was very strongly proved that for both parties, this has a very viable business case, and it could strongly benefit for both parties. Also, big painful point is usually the regulation of the local governments. Sometimes there are leaps and bounds behind the real e-commerce or online life. So make sure that your regulator supports you in the way, because if they do not support you, you pretty hard reach the wall, and the crossing of the wall could be very, very hard. And as in our case, if the banks are not standardized as in the Norwegian, choose a reliable partner who will help you with the integration and mostly will upscale the benefits of the solution rather than negatives. So it means you do not have to integrate each and every API from the bank yourself. It's very beneficial to choose some integrator which will help you along the way. And it's very beneficial if this integrator has some background and reputation within banking industry as a provider of identification services or services connected to security or another specifics. And last and the most important from my point of view, make sure that your customers understand your processes, why it's need to be done, why you need to identify the customer, what it's the benefits for him, and also how do you make it more comfortable for him and less burdensome and troublesome for his journey within you and your company. So I think that's all from my time.
Thank you, František, for your amazing story that you shared with us, and also for your recommendations that you shared with us. Once again, I would like to ask you to raise any questions you may have, and we will answer them at the end of the session. Now, Carlos Bachmeier, long-term contributing to the security community, hardworking and always smiling. Carlos, it's your turn to speak.
Okay, good morning, afternoon, night, whatever you are. I will try also to share my screen. 1 second. Is it being shown already? No. Is anybody? Are you seeing the screen? Can you confirm?
No. Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Good.
That's it. Okay. So I will try to go fast because well, otherwise I will go and spend too much time, and we have not many of that. And well, just besides providing advantages for the business due to showing that we are able to make player identification as it should, we have to also be careful with the risks that may come attached with the player identification. And we have to take into account that this is very risky. That can be very risky in terms of fines, reputation, and similar damages. We have to ensure that the authenticity of the player is there, and ID theft is a real problem because this may rise to crime and fraud issues. We need to ensure the accuracy of the player personal identification, the personal information, because we report to the regulator, and the misreporting could be a big issue. and GDPR asks us to take all reasonable steps to ensure that the personal data are correct. Also, confidentiality of the player's personal information is a must. There are enormous risks to players in any way you can imagine, and also there are risks to the company due to data breaches, as Leos already presented us. I will be focusing in a couple of examples. One is the ones due to credential stuffing events, and the other aspect is in relation to enrollment and document verification. Some of our colleagues just shared with me that they have some issues with credential stuffing events, and I think this phenomena is pervasive, and we should have a strong continuous view on this. If you are not doing, please go back to the cooks and do it fast. I just bring here some information from Akamai. Akamai, I imagine you know them, is a company that provides caching services, fast delivery of information on websites and similar services. And they are in the middle between web servers and the users, so they have a very nice observing point to see what's happening on the network. They prepare they issued very recently a report on the appraisals of gamers. So gamers are not players. Gamers are people playing different role games or whatever games at home, not chance games as ours. But they provide a excellent platform to understand some of this kind of phenomena. So credential stuffing events are elements why threat agents, bad people try to get into the accounts of customers using their credentials, the credentials that have been stolen, and they just try to log in using, for example, a couple of email and passwords. Those are the events, and well, some people call them attacks, but really it's a question to know if just trying to use a key that you found on the street on a door is an attack, or is just trying to benefit to use from lost information. So, but those attackers, those people are not breaking security in principle. So this is what is a stuffing credential stuffing approach related to, and well, is this pervasive? Yes, it's the reports brings that this is quite pervasive. In fact, in the black market, you can purchase 1 million records of email password couples by just $5. This is for quality sets that have not been used before, and so you can try to get into accounts of whatever e-commerce is open on the net with these data sets. And if you get just by chance one success of getting into an account with one of these data sets, $5 is not really a cost from the what they can get from breaching that accounts. So Akamai just report that in this period of July 18 to June 2020, they observed 100,000 millions. So this is 100 billion, 100 American billion credential stuffing events across all industries. So you can see the magnitude of the situation. And only in the gaming sector that was almost a 10% of those. In the last, in the down part of the presentation, you see that is millions accountings attempts, million logins attempts. The peak is around 200 million attempts per day. From some of the surveys they did with the gamers, this DreamHack and Akamai survey, you see that what the people is thinking about, and more of the gamers expect that the gaming company should offer two-step verification. So they ask that of course security is on a personal basis, and also the provider should provide tools to avoid issues with stuffing of credentials. So this is a real challenging issue that has to be taken when one is designing a player ID solution to enroll and to accept the login of your players. The other element is the one related to authentication, and well, one of them is let's see that your regulator is asking you to verify 1 million database of players and ensure that the documentation and their faces and the records all match properly. Then the only way to do this is not the face-to-face. It's impossible with 1 million people in a short time. And then you have to use biometrics. And this is a workable solution. The only point is the solution is bringing also some challenges. How is the reaction of the people, of your players, is one reaction, is one of the challenges. In our experience, we have, I would say, some 100 people uncomfortable with 1 million people. Is not a real worry. But the question was that some of them challenged that this was a legal treatment under GDPR. And well, this biometrics and facial recognition is a challenge in terms of data protection, of GDPR compliance. But what is clear is that the one-to-one verification is not a problem. It would be a problem in one-to-many. In our case, I would say in generally in lottery cases, for verification is okay to use biometric. It's okay with our data protection agency. So this is safe on this line. But the facial recognition as a means for login and replacement other factors may be a challenge on basis of data protection. And then it becomes that we have to think also in using player verification by means of two-factor authentications, of multi-factor authentications. And that's it. Thank you very much. The floor is yours back. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Very interesting that stuffing attacks are so easy to do. And another ways of identification, perhaps biometrics, is certainly a possible way to the future. And now Silvia Kerti, AML officer of Szerendzsé from Hungary. The floor is yours.
Welcome everybody. It's my pleasure that I could join to this webinar as a presenter. My topic is customer identification covered by the Hungarian AML Act. So I would like to focus on this client segment in my presentation, and I hope you will find some useful information in it. Our company has to comply with the AML Act since 2017. Since we have several types of products covered by the law, we have two different AML procedures with two different identification processes. I would like to summarize the most important features of these processes. At first, let me talk about how and when should we identify the clients in case of remote gambling. In case of remote gambling, we have to identify the client when the business relationship is established. This means that the client has to give all the personal data required by the law on the website. The law states that the service provider is obliged to record all the identification data during the identification in case of natural person. What happens in practice when the client gave the personal data, we send it through a secured IT channel to the database of the Ministry of Interior, and all the data will be checked there, and the validity of the document also. If everything is okay, we can conduct the PEP and sanction screening by querying into the database of another Hungarian service provider. And this is a real-time check as required by the law. And if everything is okay, we can finalize the registration. This means that the client has to click on a confirmation link, and then he can upload the money into the balance, and then the player can play. But there are cases when the online verification process is failed, and in such cases we ask the client to send a copy of the IDs, and this will be checked by colleagues manually. There is a special program which helps to make the decision that the features and the content is valid or not. And if there is any fraud suspicion or suspicious activity, we can suspend the transaction or block the registration. There is a totally different identification process in case of sport betting. The law states that if the player wins 600,000 Hungarian forint or above, we have to identify the client. We have three types of games, the Tippings Toto and Goal Toto. In that cases, we have to identify the client through a so-called player identification form in the lottery shop. In such cases, the client has to fill in this form, and we also make a copy from the ID documents. We can ask or the personal ID card or the passport or the driving license plus the address card to the verification process. If everything okay, the whole package is sent to the center and processed by the central accounting department. So they will compare that the data on the sheet is matches with the content of the ID. So if they find any suspicious activity or fraud suspicion, we can submit the we can suspend the transaction in that step. So as you heard, we have two different procedures with two different identification processes. However, the data required by the law is the same. In case of remote gambling, we have to identify the client when establishing the business relationship, and this is an online verification process. But in case of sport betting, we identify the client paper-based, and when the transaction order is submitted by the client. So this was my first topic. My second topic is...
Sorry for interruption, but we can see only your first slide. So
Oh,
maybe
sorry.
if you can share the other slides as well. Sorry for interruption.
Sorry, I was excited and I forgot it.
No problem at all.
Just a second.
Yeah, now we can see it in the full screen mode. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, yes, just a second. Yes. My second topic is what kind of issue we faced during the COVID. When the restrictions came into effect in Hungary, our goal was to increase the number of the players and to increase the bettings. We knew that we should somehow simplify our registration process. Therefore, we made the decision not to ask the account number as a very first step during the registration. And because the clients had difficulties to find or look for the account number, and many registrations were interrupted because of this. But since then, we noticed that the number of online registrations increased, and we achieved our goal. The bank account number is not mandatory based on the AML Act. However, it is a very important data from AML and fraud prevention point of view. Therefore, we check the account number at the first transfer when the client initiates the first transfer to the account. So it is checked manually by my colleagues. And my last topic is the two-factor identification, which is a future challenge and hopefully future development. We would like to introduce this authentication, and this means that beside the username and password, when the client logs into the account, they should give a 6-digit code when logs into the player account. We do not want to make it mandatory. This would be an optional service. And what would be the benefit of this service? We could increase the confidence of the client. The clients feel that their account is more secure because there are lots of clients with thousands of euros in their balance. Responsible gaming would be strengthened by this because we think that we could exclude players under the age of 18, and our company's security level would increase with this development. So this is a future plan. So this was my presentation in brief, and if you have any question, I'm ready to answer it.
Thank you, Sylvia. I really admire your ingenuity in setting up processes in accordance with AML law. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And once again, please don't hesitate to ask questions, which will be answered at the end of today's session. And now we have Oscar Vovo to share with us experience for telco and banking industry.
Okay, many thanks for the opportunity to talk here and to explain our experience in the banking industry, basically. Okay, so we have I have called my presentation towards identity corroboration. Corroboration as a new concept that we want to introduce here in the European lotteries context, and that basically it's going to be the union between the concepts of identity proofing that we have seen in previous presentations, but also authentication and online fraud detection. These are three sides, if physically possible, of the same coin. Okay, so all we know about two dimensions in this kind of concept. So we have here a 3D vision of this kind of problem, and it's what we are calling identity corroboration. So again, identity proofing, authentication, and online fraud detection. We are going to explain it in the next slides. Okay, but I want to introduce this theme basically, but a Gartner report from this own year for this from 2020 that tells that online fraud detection is expanding beyond traditional use cases, and market overlap with identity proofing and authentication is growing. Okay, so it's a trend that must be considered by European lotteries, and that we must consider also in the context of gaming as we are here. Okay, so basically in the context of the banking industry, what's the experience of the banking industry regarding all these kind of things? This is the timeline of the PSD2 directive that basically has regulated all things related to identification, authorization, authentication in the banking sector. As you know, all we take great care of our money, so and also other presenters have introduced the PSD2 as one vector that has driven to the solutions they are currently implementing in their own lotteries associations. Okay, so basically, just to let you know, the PSD2 directive timeline started in July 2013 when the European Commission published a proposal. Okay, and afterwards, nearly 2 years after, was the final approval of the PSD2 directive, and basically until the end of June of 2018 and more in September of the last year, 2019, there were a lot of documentation, a lot of technical guides of procedures that were still being defined, and nearly all them, or a lot of them, were related to these kind of things, to authorization, identification, and what we are calling identity corroboration. So it has been a really long process, really long process, with a lot of lessons that we can also apply to the lotteries context, as we are going to see. Okay, basically, just to let you know what the requirements regarding a strong customer authentication, or SCA, are called in PSD2. Basically, what mandates is that we need at least two of knowledge, possession, and ignorance, as Carlos Bachmeier has really told us in the presentation before. Okay, so something you know, something you have, and something you are. Okay, so these are the requirements regarding a strong customer authentication. Okay, so basically these kind of things. But when, and that's also really relevant. Okay, so basically when accessing payment accounts online, also when initiating electronic payments, but also when there are activities in remote channels with a risk of payment fraud. So basically there are certain activities that are considering of a high level of risk that must be more closely monitored. Okay, so what can what basically can establish new requirements or a stronger authentication requirements? Basically, for example, the directive, it mandates different kind of requirements regarding, for example, the transaction amount and the payee linked to the SCA. So basically, we have less requirements for 50 euros price for a 50 euros price than a 500 euros price or 5,000 price. Okay, so these kind of requirements are directly related to the transaction amount. Also, there are transaction requirements that are linked to the payee. So if, for example, it's a gamer, a usual gamer in our platform, and that it's always connected by the same laptop, and the context is quite similar and it's known by us, those requirements, those authentication requirements can be lesser. Okay, so can be weaker requirements that the ones when he has connected from a different country, from a different laptop, or he's winning a higher price. Okay, so basically there are exemptions based, for example, on fixed rules like the ones I have just described. So, for example, I am connected by the same laptop or playing the same game, and also behavioral analytics are in this kind of side. If my behavior is nearly the same as usual, so we can lessen the requirements. Okay, all this because one of the main factors driving adoption in the banking industry, and that also must be considered here in the lotteries industries, is that we need a better consumer experience, and it's obviously something fundamental for the gaming industry. So it must be user-friendly, it must be accessible and innovative means of payment. Okay, so what's the process? Okay, so basically the process has been divided into 4 steps. The first step in what we call digital onboarding, in the identity proofing side of this identity corroboration whole process, is what we call credentials verification. Basically, for example, is the document that it's serving as an ID an original document? Or in those countries, for example, when there's not a single ID document, the set of identity proofs that is considered is just enough? Are they original documents? Has the document been manipulated? For example, we have technology that can verify more than 16,000 points of the imaging of the identity document image in order to verify that that it has not been manipulated. Regarding the other step, the liveness detection, once these credentials have been verified, there's a second step that is liveness detection. As we are going to see, it's really important. Is it a bot, for example, that is trying to automatically be authenticated? Is this person the owner? So there are some questions that we are going to solve afterwards. The third step is the authentication per se. Okay, so we have a person that has been that has presented its own credential that is live, and must he or she being authenticated, and obviously the authorization with the given permissions, and obviously the identity verified. Let's go. Let's take a closer seeing on all these kind of steps. So basically, with the credentials verification, what we are trying to do here is just to verify by the document ID or the set of IDs that are used in order to verify the different kind of attributes that must be legally verified. For example, is the person of the nationality of the only allowed nationalities that are allowed to participate in this kind of games? His age is the proper one? For example, is 18 years old, 21 years old? Can we deduce that by the document ID that he's showing to us is the original? Has it been modification? So basically, we can also do this, and this is also relevant and most important and a differential thing, without identity verification. For example, how many of you are going to lose customers, are going to lose gamers, if you do not allow anonymous gaming? This is a really relevant question that can imply a really high percentage of gaming loss. So we must take this really into account. So basically, we can verify a set of credentials, a set of attributes without, in some cases, without verifying the identity per se. So we need to deduce information from the documents, from the ID, from the picture that or the camera, or basically from the attributes that are presented to the system. Okay. So one relevant question is that we must segregate the attributes verification from the identity verification process in order to allow anonymous gaming. Okay, and this is really relevant in those scenarios. The second question is the liveness detection. Okay, is it a bot, for example, the person that it's, or the person or the entity that is trying to get authenticated? Is it a bot? Is it an artificial intelligence system that is trying to persistently enter in our system? If not a bot, is the original ID owner? So the picture in the ID, the picture on the driving license, the picture in the banking ID corresponds to the person that is behind the camera or in front of the camera? And a third question, is it not a pre-recorded video, for example, of the same person? So three questions that we must solve in order to determine that it's alive, it's not a bot, so, and it's also the person that it's associated with the identity document that we have presented right before. Okay, for example, the one in the picture here. So there are really completely different algorithms when we are talking with a live person, and in the liveness proof, for example, we ask him to look from different sides, for example, and we deduce if, for example, this person can correspond to the identity document that has been presented to us, and when he is moving, is generating the properly algorithm, the proper hash that must be authenticated against the verification documents that have been presented right before. Okay, so different techniques, different tools, different practices that we must employ depending on the level of risk, the amount of the price, and the level of risk of the activity that we are currently monitoring. Okay, so liveness detection, one weak point that we must take into account. The third step is regarding authentication. Regarding authentication, we have many different ways. Obviously, authentication by fingerprints or by the face ID, this kind of systems that our devices, our mobile devices currently provide, and the ones that in the future will come. Okay, so this is a single authentication in the moment, in the very moment of accessing the system. But there's also a really relevant point also here that I want to introduce in my presentation. That's what is called continuous authentication through behavioral analysis. So basically, what happens if the person just gets authenticated, but afterwards all the movements, all the behavior is made by another person, all the gaming is not executed by the one that has been just authenticated, but by another one, or by a bot or a system like that. So there are concepts applied in the banking industry and many other industries, like behavioral analytics, that can be also applied in the gaming context. Okay, so we have here one kind of technology like mobile device authentication, but also that can be used, or many different ways that can also be integrated for continuous authentication. Another alternative is what it's currently called PC or laptop passwordless authentication or login. Currently, for example, we have mechanisms like Windows OLA or the fingerprint reader in MacBooks that can be allowed also to provide authentication with the same level of warranties like the mobile devices currently provide. So we have another interface currently that it's our laptop that can also be useful for authentication, and obviously, or for the initial authentication or for the continuous authentication that we can ask, for example, in different steps, okay, of the process in order to verify that the person that is currently playing the game is the one that has been already authenticated, okay, with or without identity corroboration, okay. Okay, A third way that perhaps can be useful is introduce a secure second device where the process is followed. For example, by a QR code that can be read through the mobile phone, through the device, okay, another kind of device different from our laptop. So we introduce a second device with an additional level of warranty. This mobile device can be authenticated, can be associated, for example, with the mobile number that the person that has been already registered. So basically it's another way, another two-factor authentication that can also be used, obviously, for the initial authentication and also for continuous authentication in different steps. And a fourth method I wanted to also to introduce is what it's called out-of-band authentication that can be also be made with biometrics. Obviously, all these kind of authentication procedures I am introducing right now can introduce a great level of variability in the processes regarding the level of risk of the different activities, of the pricing, of the amount of the prices that has been obtained, or the kind of game and the level of assurance that must be put in this kind of games that I am participating. In this case, out of band with biometrics is the level of warranties that are made, for example, in another external systems different from the user laptop, different from the mobile device from this user, that can also introduce some kind of verification, okay? But out of the control of the user, so introduces an additional warranty with lesser costs, for example, and also that can allow gamers that do not have intelligent devices with this kind of readers available also. And basically, I wanted to end my presentation introducing also the concept of decentralized ID. Okay, so basically we are always thinking when we are talking about authentication in the end about the authorization step about a central authority that can be the same lottery organization, that can be say, for example, the regulator, that can be a proxy, for example, for our police or another kind of Ministry of Interior or system that can basically provide us with a go or not go for that gamer, for that specific gamer. But there's different kind of solutions that are starting to grow currently in the market, that is called decentralized ID. Basically introduces the concept of a blockchain, of a distributed ledger that can have our identity attributes with the warranties of anonymization that can be relevant for our special use cases, and that can also be integrated with the previous technologies we have mentioned right before. Okay, so basically, simply just to summarize, decentralized identity is also the path to digital privacy. It depends in our regulator the balance between privacy and also allowing, for example, anonymous playing, but also always complying with preventing online fraud and also comply with all the taxing, mandatory taxing that must be also taken into account in all this. So basically, this is all the questions. I hope this can be useful for all of you. Okay.
Thank you, Oscar, for sharing with us quite a lot of details about the concepts of authentication. And we have still some time for questions. I have a question to Sylvia. Do you not think that the benefit of two-factor authentication would be an extra security?
Yes, I think the benefit is the fraud prevention. So it is used in the banking industry, and we know that it has only benefits. So I agree with this.
Of course, thank you. And a question probably for Carlos Bachmeier. So do future of lotteries verification is biometrics and fingerprints?
Wow, what a question. Well, I think the balance of verification of IDs and strong authentication depends on each country and the different pressures and risks. I mean, if the country regulators and the culture and the needs of the country go into strict underage control, responsible gaming, very strict rules for anti-money laundering, we are needing that someone has made a strong identification, verification of the identity of the player. Otherwise, you cannot do the other things. And it's not only that you need the verification, but also that you need that whenever this person is playing, to ensure that this person is who says it is. So at the end of the day, if the requirements are very strict and strong, the only way forward is full player ID and strong player identification and perhaps two-factor authentication. Yes. In any case, you could also devise playing schemes where the player, even online, is anonymous. But for example, you don't pay prices to people that are not allowed to game or underage players. So you find deterrent solutions to avoid other the playing of non acceptable players. So it's complex, but I would say that if you want to do it in a very strict way, the only answer is yes.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And I like this question. What are your expectations of challenges regarding to paying with crypto, Bitcoin, for example, instead of standard currency in the near future? It's a questions to all panelists. So maybe Oscar would like to answer this first one. What do you think about the crypto? Is it going to be the future?
Well, we are in a regulated industry, so I think that it's not really relevant what I what I think, but what our regulator thinks about it. Okay, so obviously, regarding this, obviously from the banking perspective, there's a lot of debate regarding this. I mean, all banks have started some kind of pilot projects regarding blockchain and cryptocurrency, okay, for internal use cases, but also has it been considered, for example, to use this kind of cryptocurrencies, but obviously ones that can be controlled by the government, these kind of things. Let's see what happens, okay, but we are in a regulated industry, so I think that's not really relevant. But I don't hope so in the near term. I think that there are a lot of taxes that must be paid more in this case than with the COVID. Okay, so, and taxes are going to be harder to control with cryptos.
Okay, anyone else would like to comment on the challenges regarding crypto? No, okay. And I will have probably the last question. The blockchain solution for the player authentication has been already adopted by some customer, even it's banking or telco industry, or it's only a prototype? Again, maybe a question for Oscar.
Yeah. Okay, yes. Obviously, yes. There has been pilot projects that has been used, for example, between central banks and also the banking industry. There are really strong tests. What we are talking about blockchain technology, we are not talking about public blockchains. So in most cases, the blockchain technology allows or has strong warranties regarding consistency, for example, between the data that the regulator has, the lottery organizer has, and also, for example, the one that is executing the game. So it's a way to synchronize, to have all these kind of things in full synchronization. So it's completely feasible to develop a pilot project regarding blockchain usage, and mostly in like a private project between those directly impacted, okay, as a way to establish the same warranties to all participants or to the parties that are relevant to this kind of game.
So just to add a bit, the so-called permissioned blockchains are not the free spirit blockchains that have no central authority. So it's a way of central authority of implementing in a different way databases. But that's it. So yes, it's blockchain technology, but it's not open source distributed ledger.
Yeah, that's the case. And this kind of technologies has a place here, for example. Can be envisioned, for example. For taxing, for identity, and for many other use cases.
Great. Thank you all for a great roundtable. I think it was an amazing start of the seminar. It was wonderful to hear common challenges in personal identification that we have across the markets and different ways how to cope with these challenges. Big thanks to all the speakers. Thank you everybody in the audience. Thank you for wonderful questions. We hope you enjoyed the day one. And as I promised, the recording of the webinar sessions and the slides will be made available to EL and WLA members afterwards. And join us tomorrow for another interesting discussion. We will hear from Microsoft on crisis management. The moderator of the day will be Luca. In any case, don't forget to join the networking session on day 4 to catch up with your colleagues. This is all for today. Have an amazing day, stay safe, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Leos. Good.